The bell above the door was the most reliable thing in my life. It chimed its tinny, off-key greeting for everyone, treating the hurried tourist and the dawdling regular with the same metallic indifference. For 3 years, I had stood behind this counter at Hearth and Page, a bookstore that smelled perpetually of aging paper, floor polish, and weak coffee. It was a sin I had come to associate with a specific kind of quiet safety, the kind that doesn't excite you but also doesn't let you down. My life was a collection of these small, reliable safeties. The precise way I stacked the morning papers, the familiar creak of the third step to my apartment, the low hum of the refrigerator that told me I was home. He was one of those safeties, in a way. Arthur Vance. He came in every Tuesday, just after the lunch rush, when the stores settled into the sleepy hum of the afternoon. He never bought the bestsellers or the flashy new releases. He'd head straight for the history section, his tall frame moving with a quiet economy that seemed to absorb the ambient noise. I watched him from my perch behind the counter, pretending to sort receipts or check inventory. He had silver hair, thick and well-kept, and a face that looked like it had been carved from some kinder, more patient type of stone. His eyes, a deep and thoughtful gray, were what I noticed first and what I always came back to. They held a stillness that felt ancient. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone in the city knew of Arthur Vance. He was a name in the financial papers, a quiet philanthropist whose firm had its name on the side of a sleek, imposing tower downtown. A billionaire, the articles said. The word felt foreign and absurd in the cozy confines of our little store. Here, he was just the man who ran his long fingers over the spines of books on military strategy and urban development, his brow furrowed in concentration. He always paid in cash, with crisp bills that felt different from the crumpled ones I usually handled. He'd offer a brief, polite nod, his gaze meeting mine for a moment that always felt both too short and too long. In that moment, I wasn't Leo, the 26-year-old with a half-finished arts degree and a mountain of student debt, living in a shoebox apartment above a laundromat. I was just the person on the other side of a simple transaction. But my heart would do this stupid, frantic little dance in my chest, a flutter of something I refused to name. It was foolish. He was a customer. He was decades older than me. He existed in a world of boardrooms and charity galas, a world I only glimpsed on the glossy pages of the magazines I was supposed to be shelving. I kept a business card of his. He'd left it on the counter by mistake one afternoon 6 months ago. A simple, heavy cardstock, cream-colored, with his name and a single phone number embossed in stark black letters. No title, no company logo. Just Arthur Vance. I should have thrown it away. It felt like a violation to keep it, but I'd slipped it into the back of my wallet, where it rested against a faded picture of my mom. Sometimes, late at night when the city sounds felt particularly lonely, I would take it out and run my thumb over the raised letters. It was a tangible piece of a world I couldn't touch, a connection that existed only in my head. My routine was my armor. Wake up, walk to work, sell books, walk home, eat something simple, read until my eyes grew heavy. It was a loop, a safe and predictable circle that kept the larger anxieties at bay. The anxiety about rent, about the future, about the gnawing loneliness that sometimes settled in my bones like a winter chill. Watching Arthur Vance on Tuesdays was a small, quiet crack in that armor. A brief, weekly glimpse of something else. Something steady and solid and impossibly far away. Then one Tuesday, the routine broke. He didn't come in at his usual time. The afternoon stretched on, quiet and empty. I found myself watching the door, my stomach tied in a small, ridiculous knot of disappointment. Just as I was convincing myself it didn't matter, that he was just a customer who had changed his habits, the bell chimed. It was nearly closing time. The light outside was fading to a soft, dusky purple. And there he was. He looked different. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored coat, but a simple dark sweater. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running a hand through it. He didn't go to the history section. He walked directly to the counter. Leo, he said. My name from his lips was a surprise. I hadn't been sure he even knew it. His voice was lower than I'd imagined, a calm baritone that seemed to settle the air around us. Mr. Vance. I managed my own voice sounding thin. A faint smile touched his mouth. I was hoping you might be able to help me with something. I find myself in a bit of a predicament. He gestured vaguely toward the street. I'm trying to locate a specific building in the old warehouse district, an address I was given for a potential restoration project. My navigation system seems to have given up entirely. The warehouse district was my part of town, a labyrinth of one-way streets and forgotten alleys that confused outsiders. It can be tricky down there, I said, feeling a small, unearned flicker of pride in my local knowledge. What's the address? He read it off a slip of paper. I knew the place. It was an old textile mill, a beautiful brick ghost of a building that had been empty for years. I'd always thought it was a shame, letting it crumble like that. I gave him the directions, a complicated series of turns and landmarks. He listened intently, his gray eyes focused on my face. When I finished, he didn't write it down. He just nodded slowly. I think I followed about half of that, he said, and the corner of his eye crinkled with a hint of humor. I have a better idea. My car is parked just around the corner. I'll compensate you for your time, of course, but I would be immensely grateful if you would guide me there in person. I need to see the area through the eyes of someone who actually knows it. The request hung in the air between us. It was simple. It was direct. It was also a door swinging open, leading out of my safe, predictable loop. My shift was over in 5 minutes. There was a frozen dinner waiting for me at home. The sensible part of my brain screamed at me to politely decline. It was too much, too strange. But the yearning part, the part that traced his name on a business card in the dark, was louder. Okay, I heard myself say. The word felt small and enormous at the same time. He gave me that same slow, assessing nod, but this time it was different. It felt less like a polite gesture and more like an acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation of an agreement made. Excellent, he said, his voice holding a note of what sounded like genuine relief. Lock up when you're ready. I'll wait outside. He turned and left, the bell chiming his exit. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the cool surface of the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. The routine was broken. For the first time in a long time, I had no idea what was going to happen next. And it was terrifying. And it was thrilling. Locking the door to the shop felt different that night. The familiar click of the deadbolt wasn't sealing me in for another quiet evening. It was releasing me into something new. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of impending rain and city exhaust. Arthur stood by a car I hadn't noticed before, a sleek, dark sedan that was so understated it was practically invisible, yet it hummed with an aura of quiet expense. It was the kind of car that didn't need to be flashy to announce its worth. He opened the passenger door for me. It was a small, courteous gesture, but it felt significant. The inside of the car was a world away from the rumbling city bus I took every day. It was silent and smelled of rich leather and something else, a faint, clean scent that I immediately, illogically, associated with him. I slid into the seat, the soft material molding around me. It was unnervingly comfortable. Arthur got in beside me, and the space, which had seemed large, suddenly felt more intimate. His presence had a kind of soft gravity to it. He didn't start the car immediately. He turned to me, his expression serious in the dim glow of the streetlights. Thank you again for this, Leo, he said. I hope I didn't impose, not at all. I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. It's my neighborhood. I'm happy to help. He started the engine, a low, powerful thrum that I felt more than heard. As he pulled away from the curb, I began to give directions. Take a left at the next light. Then it's the second right. He drove with the same quiet competence he did everything else, his hands resting easily on the wheel. He didn't fiddle with the radio or glance at his phone. He just drove, and he listened. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked different from the passenger seat of this car. The graffiti on the brick walls seemed more like art than vandalism. The flickering neon signs of the corner bodegas looked almost romantic. I was seeing my world through a different lens, cushioned from the noise and the grit. We didn't talk much on the way. I'd point out a turn, and he would thank me. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. It was filled with the low hum of the engine, the soft swish of the tires on the pavement, and the unspoken awareness of each other's presence. I found myself watching his hands on the steering wheel. They were large and capable, with clean, short nails. They were hands that looked like they knew how to build things, to fix things. Here, I said finally, pointing. Pull over here. He parked the car alongside the curb, across the street from the old textile mill. It loomed in the twilight, its rows of dark, empty windows like vacant eyes. A chain-link fence, rusted and sagging, surrounded the property. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. "So this is it," he said, his voice soft. He wasn't looking at the building. He was looking at me. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "It's been empty for as long as I can remember." He turned his gaze to the mill, and his expression shifted. It was a look of intense focus, of calculation and vision. I could almost see him mentally stripping away the decay, imagining what the building could become. "The city wants to tear it down," he said. "They see it as a liability. I see potential." This was the billionaire speaking now, the man who reshaped skylines. But his voice held none of the arrogance I might have expected. It held a kind of reverence. Then he did something unexpected. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "I was told this area isn't the safest after dark." It wasn't a question. "It's fine," I said, a little defensively. "You just need to know where you're going." He looked at me, a long, unreadable look. "Right? Well, you know where you're going. On the other hand, do not." He opened his door. "The directions got me here. Now, guide me." He got out of the car, not waiting for my response. I sat for a second, stunned. He wasn't just here to look at the building from the safety of his car. He wanted to walk. He wanted me to lead him. I unbuckled my seatbelt and followed him out into the cool night air. The street was quiet, deserted save for the distant wail of a siren. The air smelled damp, and a single, fat raindrop hit my cheek. Arthur stood on the sidewalk, his hands in the pockets of his trousers, watching the old mill. He seemed perfectly at ease, a calm, solid presence against the decaying urban backdrop. "Tell me about this place," he said, his voice carrying easily in the stillness. "Not the history from the city archives. Your history. What do the people who live here think of it?" The question surprised me. He wasn't asking for data points or property values. He was asking for a story, and for some reason, I wanted to give him a good one. "Most people don't think about it at all," I began, walking slowly along the fence line, hyper-aware of him falling into step beside me. "It's just there, like a mountain or a river, part of the landscape. Older folks, they remember when it was running. They say you could hear the looms humming all night. My landlord's father worked here. Said it was loud and hot, but it was a steady job." Arthur listened, his head tilted slightly. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. His quiet attention was a powerful thing. It made me feel like what I was saying mattered. "Kids used to dare each other to sneak in," I continued, a small smile touching my lips at the memory. "They'd tell stories about it being haunted by the ghost of a foreman who fell into a machine. It was our local monster. Were you one of those kids?" he asked, his voice laced with gentle amusement. I shook my head. "No. I was always the one who stood on the outside of the fence, too scared to break the rules." It was a small, silly admission, but it felt strangely revealing. I was still that kid in many ways, standing on the outside of things, too afraid to trespass. I risked a glance at him. He was watching my face, his own expression thoughtful. "There's no shame in respecting boundaries," he said simply. His words settled something in me. He didn't mock my caution. He validated it. We continued our slow circuit of the building, the crumbling brick and broken panes of glass passing by. I pointed out things I'd never consciously noted before. The faded ghost sign of the company name high on the wall, the ornate ironwork on a gate that had long since rusted shut, the stubborn patch of wildflowers growing through a crack in the pavement. As we rounded a corner, my foot caught on an upended piece of sidewalk. I stumbled, my arms flailing for a second. Instantly, his hand was on my elbow, steadying me. His grip was firm and warm, even through the fabric of my jacket. It wasn't a fleeting touch. His hand lingered there for a moment, a solid point of contact in the dark. "Careful," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. My breath caught. The warmth from his hand seemed to spread up my arm, a pleasant, unnerving heat. I could feel the strength in his fingers, the controlled restraint. He could have held me tighter, but he didn't. It was a touch of support, not possession. When he let go, the absence of his hand was as noticeable as its presence had been. "Thanks," I mumbled, my face feeling hot despite the cool air. We finished our walk in silence, returning to the car. The light drizzle had started in earnest now, speckling the windshield and gleaming on the dark asphalt. Before we got back in, Arthur paused, looking at the mill one last time. "Thank you, Leo," he said, turning to face me fully. The streetlights cast soft shadows on his face, making the lines around his eyes seem deeper. "This was more helpful than any surveyor's report," I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. My mind was still replaying the feeling of his hand on my arm. I was analyzing it, turning it over and over like a strange stone found on the beach. Was it just a reflex? A simple, polite gesture? Or was there something more in the way it lingered? I was dissecting the moment, trying to find a meaning that probably wasn't there, because the alternative, that it meant something, that he felt even a fraction of the strange pull I did, was too terrifying to contemplate. The drive back to the bookstore was as quiet as the drive there, but the quality of the silence had changed. It felt heavier now, charged with unspoken thoughts. I was intensely aware of the space between us, of the way his shoulder occasionally brushed mine when he took a sharp turn. Every small, accidental contact felt like a spark. He pulled up in front of Hearth and Page. The street was empty, the neighboring shops dark. He put the car in park but left the engine running, its low hum a comforting presence against the patter of the rain. "I'd like to compensate you for your time," he said, reaching for his wallet. "No," I said, maybe a little too quickly. "You don't have to do that." I was happy to help. The idea of taking his money felt wrong, like it would turn the experience into a transaction, cheapening the strange connection I felt had been forged between us on that dark sidewalk. He paused, his hand hovering. He looked at me, his gaze direct and serious. "Your time is valuable, Leo. Your knowledge of that neighborhood is valuable. Please, allow me." There was no condescension in his tone, only a quiet insistence that felt like respect. I was torn. My bank account was a wasteland. The money would make a real difference. But my pride, stubborn and foolish, resisted. "How about this?" I countered, feeling a sudden surge of boldness. "If you're really serious about that building, you'll need more local insight than just one walk-around. You'll need to know about the community council, the zoning quirks, what the people who live there actually need." A slow smile spread across his face. It transformed him, softening the stoic lines and making him look younger. "Is that an offer to consult?" My heart leaped into my throat. "Maybe," I said, trying to sound casual. "I could write up some notes for you." "A local's perspective, I would like that very much," he said. "And I will insist on paying you a proper consulting fee for it. We can draw up a simple contract. This will be a professional arrangement." He was giving me an out. He was making it clean, professional, taking away the murky personal element and putting a clear, respectable frame around it. It was a gift, a way for me to accept his help without feeling like a charity case. It was thoughtful, incredibly thoughtful. "Okay," I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. "A professional arrangement." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a pen and one of his simple, elegant business cards. He wrote something on the back and handed it to me. It was his personal cell number. "My office will be in touch tomorrow to sort out the details of the contract," he said. "But call or text me if you think of anything before then." I stared at the card in my hand. It was a twin to the one I had hidden in my wallet. Only this one had been given to me. It was real. This was all real. "Thank you," I said, finally meeting his eyes. The space between us crackled. I felt a powerful urge to say something more, something honest, but the words wouldn't form. "Good night, Leo," he said softly. I got out of the car and hurried to my apartment door, fumbling with my keys. I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on me until I was safely inside. I leaned against the closed door, the business card clutched in my hand, and listened until the sound of his car's engine faded into the night. The following week was a blur. A courier delivered a simple, one-page contract to the bookstore. The consulting fee listed was more than I made in 2 months. It was a generous, almost shocking amount. My hand trembled as I signed it. I spent every evening after work at my small kitchen table, surrounded by maps and notes. I wrote about the neighborhood with a passion I hadn't felt for anything in years. I wrote about the failed businesses and the community gardens, the beloved old diner and the playground that needed new equipment. I poured everything I knew, everything I felt about my corner of the city, onto the page. I sent it all to him in a single, comprehensive email. He replied within the hour. "This is excellent, Leo. Exactly what I needed. More than I'd hoped for. Would you be available to walk through the site with me and my architect this Saturday? 10 a.m. Your perspective on site would be invaluable." And so I found myself, on a bright, chilly Saturday morning, standing once again in front of the old textile mill. This time, I wasn't a guide in the dark. I was a paid consultant. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Arthur was already there, talking to a sharp, professionally dressed woman who I assumed was the architect. He saw me approaching, and his face broke into a warm, genuine smile. It did something strange to my insides. "Leo, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm and brief. "This is Elena, my lead architect." Elena gave me a polite, professional nod. She had a no-nonsense air about her, and I immediately fell out of my depth. I was wearing my best jeans and a clean sweater. They were wearing clothes that probably cost more than my rent. Arthur seemed to sense my discomfort. "Leo has provided us with an invaluable community-level perspective on this project," he explained to Elena, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at me. "Leo, I was hoping you could walk us through some of the points you made in your report." He had validated my presence, defined my role. He had made me an equal in this conversation. The gratitude I felt was a warm wave washing over me. For the next 2 hours, we walked the perimeter of the property. A representative from the city had unlocked the gate for us, and we were able to get closer to the building itself. I spoke about my ideas, how the south-facing wall would be perfect for a community mural, how the old loading dock could be converted into an outdoor seating area for a cafe, how a green space on the west side could serve the nearby apartment buildings that had no yards for children to play in. I spoke with a confidence that surprised me. And Arthur listened. He didn't just listen, he engaged. He would ask follow-up questions, turning my vague ideas into practical considerations. "Elena, could we reinforce that wall to support a large-scale art installation? What would the drainage requirements be for a public green space there?" He treated my contributions not as charming local color, but as serious components of the plan. I watched him, the way he moved through the space, the way he could command a situation with a quiet question rather than a loud order. There was a power in his stillness, a strength in his restraint. At one point, Elena was taking measurements near the foundation, and Arthur and I stood side by side, looking up at the towering brick facade. "You have a good eye," he said, his voice low and for my ears only. "I've had a lot of time to look at it," I replied, shrugging. "It's more than that," he said, turning to face me slightly. "You see what's not there. You see the potential. It's a rare quality." His praise was a palpable thing. It settled on my shoulders like a warm coat. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine, a subtle radiation of warmth in the crisp morning air. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, the sounds of Elena's measuring tape and the distant city traffic filling the space between us. It felt right, standing beside him, working on something together. It felt like a place I belonged. I started to notice the small things. The way his gaze would find mine across the property, offering a small, encouraging nod. The way he subtly steered the conversation back to me whenever Elena's technical questions threatened to overwhelm me. These were quiet acts of protection, of inclusion. He was making a space for me, and he was doing it so discreetly that only I could see it. As we were wrapping up, Elena rolled up her blueprints. "This has been very productive. Arthur, I'll have revised sketches for you by Wednesday." She gave me another polite nod. "Mr. Miller, your insights were very helpful." She called me Mr. Miller. It was a small formality, but it made me feel like a professional, not just some kid from the neighborhood. After she left, Arthur and I lingered for a moment by his car. The morning sun was high in the sky now, glinting off the car's polished surface. "So," I said, feeling a familiar awkwardness creep in now that we were alone again. "I guess that's it." "Not quite," he said. He leaned against the car, crossing his arms. It was a casual posture, but his eyes were intent. "This project will be a long process. Zoning, permits, community feedback. I'd like to keep you on as a consultant, if you're interested, to be the liaison to the community, to make sure we don't lose the vision you laid out." The offer was breathtaking. A real, long-term job, a role with purpose. It was a lifeline thrown to me from a world I never thought I'd be able to reach. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Just say yes," he said, a soft smile playing on his lips. And of course I did. I said yes. The next few weeks fell into a new kind of routine. I was still working at the bookstore, but my evenings and weekends were filled with work for Arthur. We met frequently, sometimes at his downtown office, a stunning, minimalist space with a view that made the whole city look like a toy set, and sometimes for coffee at a neutral cafe halfway between his world and mine. Our meetings were always professional. We talked about the project, about timelines and budgets and community outreach strategies. But underneath the professional surface, something else was growing. A current of awareness, of tension. I saw it in the way our eyes would meet and hold for a second too long over architectural plans. I felt it in the way he would sometimes pause, his train of thought lost for a moment, while I was speaking. I learned more about him in these small, unguarded moments. I learned that he preferred black coffee, that he had a dry sense of humor that only appeared when he was relaxed, and that he was fiercely protective of the people and things he cared about. He spoke of his late wife with a quiet, profound respect, and I got the sense that his philanthropic work was a way of continuing a legacy they had built together. He was a good man, a steady, decent, profoundly good man. And my feelings for him, the ones I had tried to suppress and deny, were growing into something deep and undeniable. One afternoon, we were at his office, going over a list of local contractors. A call came in on his private line. He apologized and took it, turning to look out the vast window at the city below. His back was to me, but I could hear the change in his voice. It became colder, sharper. "No," he said, his voice firm. "That is not acceptable." The terms were clear. "I don't care what the market is doing. We had an agreement. Then you will find a way to honor it, or the consequences will be severe. Make it right." He hung up and stood with his back to me for a long moment, his hand resting on the glass. The silence in the room was absolute. I saw a flash of the other Arthur Vance, the ruthless businessman, the billionaire who didn't get to where he was by being soft. It was intimidating. Then he took a deep breath and turned around. The hard edge was gone from his face, replaced by a weary sort of apology. "I'm sorry you had to hear that. It's okay," I said quietly. "Business is business." He walked back to the table and sat down, running a hand through his silver hair. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, "the part of my life that requires me to be that man, it's exhausting. And I worry it bleeds over. I worry it makes people see me as only that." He looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine. "Is that what you see, Leo?" The question was raw, vulnerable. It was a crack in his own carefully constructed armor. He was asking me, of all people, how he was perceived. He was asking for my reassurance. This is it, I thought. This is a moment of softness, an open door. "No," I said, and my voice was firm, resolute. "I see the man who wants to build a community space in a neighborhood everyone else has written off. I see the man who listened to my stupid stories about a haunted mill. I see the man who made sure his architect called me Mr. Miller." A profound stillness settled over him. He watched me, his expression unreadable but intense. The air between us grew thick, heavy with everything we weren't saying. The professional boundary we had so carefully maintained felt suddenly thin, almost transparent. "And does my being, all of that?" He gestured around the opulent office, a sweep of his hand that encompassed the view, the wealth, the power. "Does it make this uncomfortable for you? The age difference? All of it. I need you to be honest." He had named the elephants in the room. He had laid them bare and given me permission to speak my truth without fear of consequence. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Now, I am in the present. This is happening now. My breath is shallow. My hands are clammy under the table. He is waiting for an answer, and the answer feels like it will change everything. Sometimes, I say, the word tasting like rust in my mouth. My voice is a stranger's. Sometimes it's intimidating. I worry about what people think. I worry about the imbalance. I look down at my hands, unable to meet his gaze. Honesty is a knife, and I've just laid it on the table between us. He is silent for a long time. I can feel his gaze on me, the weight of it. I brace myself for the polite retreat, for the professional wall to slam back into place. "The only thing that matters is what you and I think," he says, his voice quiet but unshakable. "And there is no imbalance, Leo. Not in the things that matter. I value your mind. I value your perspective. And," he pauses, and the pause stretches into a taut wire, "I value you. Far more than a consultant." My head snaps up. His eyes are full of a raw, unguarded emotion that mirrors the frantic beating of my own heart. It's there. It's real. It's not just in my head anymore. It's in the space between us, a living, breathing thing. The tipping point came at a community meeting. Arthur had insisted on holding it in the local library's dusty basement, a neutral ground, rather than some sterile downtown conference room. He wanted the residents to feel comfortable, to speak their minds. And they did. I stood at the front with him, a flip chart and markers my only props, trying to explain the vision for the mill project. Most people were cautiously optimistic, but one man, a sour-faced landlord named Henderson who owned half the dilapidated buildings on my street, was not. "I don't see what gives him the right," Henderson said, jabbing a thick finger in Arthur's direction, though he refused to look at him. "Some downtown moneybags coming in here, telling us what we need. And using one of our own to do it." His eyes, small and mean, landed on me. "How much is he paying you, kid, to sell us out?" The accusation hung in the stale, damp air. My face flushed hot with shame and anger. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to defend Arthur, but before I could speak, Arthur stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice calm and dangerously level. "You will address me directly. And you will not speak to Leo that way again." The room went silent. Henderson, who was used to bullying his tenants and getting his way, seemed to shrink under the force of Arthur's quiet command. "Leo is here because he has more integrity and vision in his little finger than you have in your entire portfolio of neglected properties," Arthur continued, his voice still low, but each word landing like a precision strike. "He is here as a valued partner in this project. His compensation is a private matter, but I assure you, it is for services rendered, not for his allegiance. Unlike you, his allegiance isn't for sale." He held Henderson's gaze for a long, charged moment. The landlord sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red, and then he sat down, defeated. The meeting continued, but I barely heard it. My mind was reeling. Arthur had defended me. Not just defended me. He had elevated me, called me his partner. It was a public declaration, a protective gesture so fierce and unequivocal it left me breathless. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he had placed me firmly on his side of it. The unspoken feelings between us were suddenly, glaringly, obvious. After the meeting, as we packed up the charts and papers, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The other residents had filed out, leaving just the two of us in the quiet basement room. I couldn't look at him. I was too overwhelmed, too shaken. "Thank you," I mumbled, my voice thick. "For what you said." He stopped what he was doing and came to stand in front of me. He was close enough that I could see the flecks of charcoal in his gray eyes. "I only spoke the truth, Leo, you didn't have to," I said, finally looking up at him. "You could have just ignored him." "No," he said, his voice soft but firm. "No, I could not." We stood there, caught in a silent standoff. The subtext of the last few weeks, of every lingering glance and accidental touch, was roaring between us. The professional arrangement was a flimsy, transparent sheet of glass, and we had just shattered it. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said, and the words were a question, an offering. He was asking for my consent, not for his actions at the meeting, but for what they implied. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. This was the moment. The precipice. I could retreat, thank him politely, and try to rebuild the professional wall between us. Or I could step forward. "You didn't," I said, and my voice was clear and steady. The two words were everything. They were permission. They were an answer. They were a confession. A flicker of something. Relief. Hope. Something intensely vulnerable. Passed through his eyes. He raised a hand, slowly, as if giving me time to pull away. He didn't touch my face. He gently brushed a stray piece of hair from my forehead. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a jolt straight through me. His fingers were warm against my skin. "Leo," he began, his voice raspy, and then he stopped, as if he didn't trust himself to continue. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the old fluorescent lights and the sound of my own ragged breathing. He didn't push. He didn't rush. He simply waited, letting me have the space, letting me have the choice. He had named the power dynamic before, and now he was living out his promise to respect it. His restraint was the most profound act of care I had ever experienced. And in that moment, I knew I was done being the kid on the outside of the fence. I took the final step, closing the small distance between us. I reached out and rested my hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his jacket. "Arthur," I said, using his first name without the shield of a business meeting for the first time. It felt right on my tongue. "It's okay." He searched my eyes, looking for any hint of doubt, any flicker of hesitation. He found none. He let out a slow breath he seemed to have been holding forever. "Is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is it all right if I want this to be more than just a professional arrangement?" "Yes," I said, the word coming out on a rush of air. God, yes, that was all he needed. The carefully maintained control in his expression finally gave way to pure, unadulterated feeling. His eyes darkened with an emotion I couldn't name, but felt in the deepest part of my soul. It was a yearning that matched my own. He brought his other hand up, cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was reverent. It was a question, the final one. And I answered by leaning into his touch, closing my eyes. The library basement, with its scent of old paper and damp concrete, faded away. There was only the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him in front of me, and the terrifying, wonderful promise of what was about to happen. He had guided me into his world, and now I was guiding him into mine, and somewhere in the middle, we were finally about to meet. The confession was in the air, a silent, shimmering thing we had both finally acknowledged. But the words still needed to be said. The last lock on the door needed to be turned. He leaned his forehead against mine. His eyes were closed, and I could feel the soft whisper of his breath on my skin. The world had shrunk to this single point of contact. The vast difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, in our life experiences, it all melted away into irrelevance. We were just two men, standing in the quiet basement of a library, on the brink of everything. "I think," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur against my skin. "I am falling in love with you, Leo." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, but it was a blow that didn't hurt. It was a blow that pieced me back together. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes, hot and sudden. All the loneliness, all the quiet yearning I had carried for so long, it all just dissolved. "I think I've been in love with you since the first day you walked into the bookstore," I whispered back, the admission feeling like the truest thing I had ever said. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his gray eyes shining with an impossible tenderness. A slow, wondrous smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It made him look 10 years younger. It made him look beautiful. "Then I have been a fool for waiting this long," he said. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate, pent-up passion. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a kiss of arrival. His lips were soft, warm, and sure. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was a promise. There was no imbalance of power, no sense of taking or being taken. It was a perfect, seamless meeting of equals. My hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was as calm and reliable as he was. He deepened the kiss gently, a soft exploration that spoke of patience and profound care. My own frantic heartbeat began to slow, syncing with his. A sense of peace washed over me, a feeling of rightness so absolute it was breathtaking. This was what I had been missing, what I had been yearning for without even knowing its shape. It was this. It was him. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We didn't move away. We stayed with our foreheads pressed together, our hands still holding on to each other, anchoring ourselves in the new reality we had just created. His fingers laced with mine, his large hand enveloping my own in a grip that was both protective and gentle. "So," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happens now?" I let out a shaky laugh, a sound of pure relief. "I don't know. I've never done this before, neither have I," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was the most intimate thing he could have shared. Not like this. We stood there for a long time, just breathing each other in. The future was a vast, unknown territory, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to step into it. Because I wouldn't be stepping into it alone. He drove me home, his hand resting on the center console, his fingers intertwined with mine for the entire journey. We didn't speak much. There was nothing that needed to be said. The comfortable silence was back, but now it was filled with a new kind of warmth, a shared understanding that was more eloquent than words. When he parked in front of my building, he turned off the engine. The rain had started again, a gentle drumming on the roof of the car. "I don't want this night to end," he said quietly, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "It doesn't have to," I said, my voice soft. I looked from our joined hands to his face. "Come up." The invitation was simple, but it was loaded with meaning. My apartment was not his world. It was a tiny, third-floor walk-up with a dripping faucet and second-hand furniture. It was my safe, lonely little box. Inviting him into it felt like the ultimate act of trust. He searched my face, and I knew he understood. He saw the offer for what it was. Not just an invitation for the night, but an invitation into my life. Okay, he said simply. We walked up the 3 flights of stairs in silence. I was acutely aware of the peeling paint on the walls, the faint smell of bleach from the laundromat below. I unlocked my door and pushed it open, bracing myself for his reaction. He stepped inside and looked around. He took in the single, cramped room, the small kitchenette, the worn-out armchair, the stacks of books on every available surface. I held my breath, waiting for a flicker of judgment, of pity. But all I saw in his eyes was a gentle curiosity. He walked over to my bookshelf, his fingers tracing the spines just as he did in the store. He picked up a framed photo from my desk, the one of my mom and me at the beach, years ago. "This is a lovely space," he said, turning to me. "It's warm. It feels like you." And just like that, all my insecurity vanished. He didn't see the poverty. He saw the person. He saw me. That night, we didn't do much. We talked for hours, sitting on my lumpy sofa, sharing stories of our lives that hadn't fit into our professional meetings. I told him about my dad leaving, about my mom's struggle, about my abandoned dream of being a painter. He told me about his wife, their quiet life together, his loneliness after she was gone, the crushing weight of a world that saw him only as a number in a bank account. We laid our histories bare, our vulnerabilities, our fears. And in that tiny apartment, surrounded by my books and my life, we built the foundation of something real. It wasn't about a billionaire and a bookstore clerk. It was about Arthur and Leo. And it was just the beginning. I woke to the pale gray light of morning filtering through my thin curtains. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The community meeting, the confession, the kiss, the hours of talking that had stretched late into the night. Arthur. I turned my head. He was asleep in my bed, on his side, facing me. He had insisted on taking the couch, but I had refused. Seeing him here, in my bed, in my life, was surreal. His silver hair was mussed, and his face, in the soft light of dawn, looked peaceful and unguarded. The formidable Arthur Vance was gone, and in his place was just a man who had looked at me and seen someone worthy of love. But as the city outside began to wake up, a cold knot of anxiety started to form in my stomach. The magic of the night began to recede, and the harsh reality of the morning rushed in to take its place. What had I done? He was Arthur Vance. His world was so vast, so complicated. And I was me. The differences between us, which had seemed so insignificant last night, now loomed like mountains. I pictured his sleek car parked on my rundown street. I imagined what my neighbors would think, what Henderson would say if he saw it. I thought about his employees, his board of directors, the society pages. I would be a footnote in his story, a curiosity. The young man, the billionaire, was what? Dating? Sponsoring? The words felt ugly and transactional. The morning light was stripping away the romance and leaving behind a stark, uncomfortable calculus of power and perception. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, pulling on a t-shirt and jeans. I needed to move, to do something normal. I went into the tiny kitchen and started making coffee, the familiar ritual a small comfort. The gurgle of the coffee maker was a sound from my old life, my safe, predictable loop. A life that had been blown to pieces. Was this a mistake? Was I just a momentary diversion for him? A project like the old mill? The doubt was a bitter taste in my mouth, worse than my cheap, burnt coffee. I leaned against the counter, my head in my hands, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. "Good morning," his voice, low and slightly rough with sleep, startled me. I turned around. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, wearing his trousers and button-down shirt from the day before, now rumpled. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and focused on me. "Morning," I mumbled, turning back to the coffee pot, unable to meet his gaze. I felt him come up behind me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his warmth, his presence filling the small space. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle. "Talk to me. What are you thinking?" He was so perceptive. He could read the doubt on my back. I took a shaky breath and turned to face him, leaning back against the counter. I had to say it. I had to give voice to the fear before it poisoned everything. "This is insane," I said, the words tumbling out. "You and me. Look at this place. Look at my life. And look at you. Last night. Last night was one thing. But in the light of day, I don't know how this works, Arthur. I don't want to be a project. Or a secret. He listened patiently, his expression calm, his gaze unwavering. He let me say all of it. All the ugly, fearful things. When I was done, a heavy silence fell between us. Then, he took a step closer, closing the distance between us. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine. I hear you, he said softly. I understand why you would feel that way. And you're right to be cautious. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I don't have all the answers, Leo. I don't know exactly how this will work either. It will be complicated. People will talk. But I want to be very clear about two things. He squeezed my hand. First, you are not a project. You are the most brilliant, insightful, and decent man I have met in a very long time. What I feel for you has nothing to do with this apartment or your bank account, and everything to do with who you are. My throat felt tight. Second, he continued, his voice firm, you will never be a secret. I am not ashamed of my feelings for you. I am proud of them. If you'll let me, I want to stand by your side, in public, and I don't give a damn what Henderson or anyone else has to say about it. His sincerity was a tangible force. It pushed back against the tide of my anxiety, a steady, solid wall against the waves of doubt. He wasn't dismissing my fears. He was acknowledging them and offering to face them with me. But, he added, his expression softening, this has to be on your terms. At your pace. We will navigate this together. The power in this relationship, Leo, is shared. Always. If you need space, you'll have it. If you need to slow down, we will. Nothing happens that you are not 100% comfortable with. That is my promise to you. He was giving me back my agency, the very thing I feared I was losing. He wasn't solving the problem for me. He was offering to be my partner in finding the solution. It was the most reassuring thing he could have possibly said. The knot in my stomach began to loosen. I looked at our joined hands, his strong and weathered, mine smaller and paler. We were different, but maybe we could fit together. Okay, I whispered. Okay, a small test of our new, fragile bond came sooner than I expected. The following weekend, Arthur asked me to have brunch with him. Not at some fancy, exclusive restaurant downtown, but at the old diner in my neighborhood. The one I'd mentioned in my report, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and the best pancakes in the city. It was my turf. It was a deliberate choice, another quiet gesture of respect. We sat in a booth by the window, the Sunday morning sun streaming in. It felt surprisingly normal. We talked and laughed, and he told me stories about his early business ventures, the failures as well as the successes. He was self-deprecating and funny, and I saw another facet of the man I was falling for. Then the bell above the diner door jingled, and in walked my landlord, Mr. Henderson. My whole body tensed. He saw us immediately. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He swaggered over to our booth, his presence casting a greasy shadow over our table. Well, he said, his eyes flicking between me and Arthur. Looks like the kid really hit the jackpot. Enjoying the fruits of your partnership? The last word was dripping with insinuation. I felt my face burn. This was it. The public test. The moment of truth. Before I could even think of what to say, Arthur placed his hand over mine on the table, a simple, grounding touch. He didn't even look at Henderson. He just continued his conversation with me, as if the man wasn't there. As I was saying, Leo, he said, his voice perfectly calm, I think you're right. The original brick is too important to cover up. We'll have to find a way to restore it. Henderson stood there, momentarily confused. He was used to being the center of attention, the bully who got a reaction. Arthur's complete and utter dismissal of him was more effective than any angry retort would have been. He had rendered the man invisible. Henderson's face darkened. He opened his mouth to say something else, something uglier, but the diner's owner, a formidable woman named Maria, appeared at his side. Henderson, she said, her voice sharp. You bothering my customers? I was just saying hello to my tenant, he sneered. Then you've said it, Maria said, crossing her arms. Now go sit down or get out. And for the record, any friend of Leo's is a friend of mine. She gave Arthur a brief, appraising nod, then turned and walked back to the counter. Defeated and stripped of his audience, Henderson shot me one last venomous glare and shuffled off to a corner booth. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hand was trembling slightly under Arthur's. He gave it a gentle squeeze. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his eyes full of concern. I looked at him, at his calm, steady face. And then I looked around the diner, at Maria polishing glasses behind the counter, at the quiet solidarity she had shown. I had been so worried about what my world would think of him. It had never occurred to me that they might just see what I saw, a good man. "Yeah," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. "Yeah, I'm okay." We finished our brunch in peace. And as we walked out of the diner and into the bright sunlight, Arthur's hand still holding mine, I felt a new kind of confidence settle in me. We had faced the test, and we had done it together. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like we had a map. In the weeks that followed, we began to consciously build the framework of our new life together. It was a process of careful negotiation and honest conversation. We didn't fall into easy assumptions. We chose each step deliberately. One evening, sitting in his cavernous, beautiful living room overlooking the city lights, he handed me a small, velvet box. My stomach dropped. It was too soon, too much. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, reading the panic on my face. "Open it." Inside was a single, elegantly cut key. "This is not an invitation to move in," he said, his voice earnest. "This is not an obligation. This is just access. I want you to feel like this is your space too. A place you can come to whenever you want, whether I'm here or not. A place you can work, or read, or just be. No strings attached. Come and go as you please. I want you to know this space is safe for you." It was another one of his profound gestures of respect for my independence. A key wasn't a demand. It was an offer of trust. It was a way of balancing the scales, of making his world accessible to me without insisting I abandon my own. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. I closed my hand around the cool metal of the key. It felt heavy, substantial. It felt like a promise. We also set clear boundaries. The mill project continued, and when we were in meetings or on-site, we were partners. Professional, focused. He never pulled rank, and I never deferred to him because of our personal relationship. We respected the work, and in doing so, we respected each other. But the moment we left the context of work, the dynamic would shift. He would take my hand, or I would lean my head on his shoulder in the car, and we would be Arthur and Leo again. It was a dance we learned together, keeping the different parts of our lives in a delicate, healthy balance. He never tried to fix my life. He didn't offer to pay off my student loans or buy me a new car. He knew that would break the fragile equality we were building. Instead, he created opportunities. He paid me fairly for my consulting work, and when a marketing position opened up with one of the nonprofits his foundation supported, he passed the listing along to me. "I think you'd be great at this," was all he said. I applied, went through 3 rounds of interviews on my own merits, and I got the job. The day I gave my notice at the bookstore was bittersweet. I would miss the smell of old paper and the quiet rhythm of the days. But as I packed my few belongings into a box, I knew I was leaving behind more than just a job. I was leaving behind the timid, fearful version of myself, the boy who was too afraid to step over the fence. One Saturday morning, I let myself into Arthur's apartment with my new key. The silence of the large space was comforting. I made coffee in his state-of-the-art kitchen, which was slowly starting to feel less intimidating and more like a place I belonged. I found him on the large balcony off the living room, a place that had quickly become our favorite spot. He was standing at the railing, a ceramic mug in his hand, looking out at the city waking up below. He was wearing a simple gray sweatshirt and soft-looking sweatpants. He looked utterly content. I came and stood beside him, leaning against the railing. He didn't say anything, just draped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. We stood there in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The city, which had once seemed like a symbol of the vast, unbridgeable gap between us, now just looked like our city. The view from up here wasn't a display of power anymore. It was just a view, a beautiful view we were sharing. The aroma of coffee mingled with the cool morning air. His arm around me was a solid, comforting weight. This was it. This was the quiet intimacy I had never known I was searching for. It wasn't a grand, dramatic declaration. It was a simple, domestic moment that felt more real and more profound than any sweeping romance. It felt like arrival. It felt like home. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in his clean, familiar scent. I thought back to the man I was just a few months ago, the lonely, anxious young man hiding behind a bookstore counter. My life had been so small, so circumscribed by fear. I had been watching the world from the sidelines. Arthur had opened a door for me, but he had never once pushed me through it. He had waited for me to find the courage to walk through it on my own. He had used his resources not to control or coerce, but to create a space where I could grow. He had seen me, truly seen me, and in his steady, patient gaze, I had finally started to see myself. The difference in our ages and our wealth hadn't vanished. It was still a fact of our lives, a piece of our context. But it was no longer a cage or a barrier. It was just context. The foundation we had built was stronger than that. It was forged from mutual respect, from shared vulnerability, and from a conscious, deliberate choice to love each other, not in spite of our differences, but with a full and honest acceptance of them. He turned his head and pressed a soft kiss to my hair. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. I smiled, a real, bone-deep smile of contentment. I looked out at the sprawling city, at the sun climbing higher in the sky, at the promise of a new day. "I'm thinking," I said, my voice full of a quiet, steady certainty, "that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He tightened his arm around me, and we stood there together, watching the morning break. Two men who had found their way to each other across an impossible divide, building a new world together, one quiet sunrise at a time. I was no longer afraid. I was steady, and I was home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.